Welcome, fearless listeners, to Phantom Fables, your entrance to the dark and the macabre. Tonight, we venture into an ancient forest of mystery, into the depths of which lurks an invisible power, watching everything with an eye of darkness. Beware, for this is not just a story, it is an encounter with the unseen. In the heart of darkness, where no light dares to shine, there lies a terror that defies perception. Those who dare to venture must confront the horrors that remain hidden in the shadows. This is the spine-tingling tale of the Unseen Terror. It was 1657, and the air in Wilhelmstadt was thick with fear. The small village, tucked away in the dense forests of Bavaria, had long been shrouded in rumors of an ancient curse. For centuries, the villagers spoke in hushed tones about a forgotten book, Codex Tenebris, the Book of Shadows, that was said to bring misfortune to anyone who dared to seek it. Dominic, a historian, looked outside at the dying light through the windows of his cabin. He had been in Wilhelmstadt for 3 months. His investigation began after a mysterious series of deaths was reported in the town. On the 3rd day of his stay, the villagers found the bodies of 3 of their citizens near the old ruins of a castle located on the edge of the forest. The faces were frozen in fear, and there were no marks of wounds on their bodies. Dominic had steeled himself for logical responses, yet week by week was eroding that certainty. Now whispers ran about dark beings lurking in the woods, unheard sounds echoing throughout the night hours, and the overall unease began to creep around the soul of the village like an omen. He hadn't traveled all this distance on his own. Eitan joined him on his journey, as a good skeptic and a practicing doctor would do. Eitan was quick to dismiss the villagers' superstitions as the ramblings of frightened minds. Clayton, a young linguist with a keen interest in ancient texts, had joined their group, eager to uncover the truth about the cursed book. And then there was Florence, a widowed herbalist who had lived in Wilhelmstadt all her life. She was resistant to uncover the secrets of the forest, yet she couldn't turn a deaf ear to growing threats against her community. They all convened in Florence's cabin on one tempestuous evening. The gust howled outside with the rain thrashing the panes. Dominic had uncovered an entire set of yellowed maps and documents. By the crackling hearth fire, they spent several hours studying this treasure trove of old records and documents. "This," Dominic said, nodding to a faded map, "is where the castle once stood. The villagers call it Schattenberg, the Shadow Castle." Clayton leaned forward, tracing with his fingers the edges of the map. "And you think the book is there?" Dominic hesitated. "The legends point to it. But if the villagers are right, finding the codex won't just be a matter of exploration. There are forces at play here, something beyond reason." Eitan scoffed. "Forces beyond reason? Dominic, you're letting these stories get to you. There's no such thing as curses. This is likely the work of poison or some unknown disease." Before Dominic could say anything, Florence spoke up. "Disease doesn't make people die with their faces twisted in fear, and it doesn't make the forest come alive with whispers." Her voice was shaking a little, but her determination was clear. "We need to be careful." The group fell silent. It was Ada, Florence's sister, who finally broke the tension. "If you're all going to Schattenberg, I'm coming with you. Someone needs to bring common sense to this madness." Dominic nodded. "We leave at dawn." The next morning, they set out for the castle. The forest path was treacherous, slick with mud from the night before's rain. Ancient trees towered above, their gnarled branches twisting like skeletal hands. As they ventured deeper, an eerie silence enveloped them. The usual sounds of the forest, birds chirping, leaves rustling, were absent. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. "I don't like this," Florence muttered, clutching a small pouch of herbs around her neck. "You and me both," Ada replied, her hand resting on the hilt of a dagger she carried for protection. After hours of walking, they reached the castle ruins. Schattenberg was a crumbling shadow of its former glory. ivy-covered walls jutting out of the earth like bones of a long-dead giant. The air was heavy with the scent of damp stone and decay. Eitan surveyed the ruins with a clinical eye. It's just a pile of rocks, hardly the stuff of nightmares. But as they drew nearer, the temperature seemed to fall. A soft whispering, like pages turning, was carried on the breeze. Inside the castle, they entered a large, cavernous hall. Moonlight filtered through the broken ceiling, casting ghostly patterns on the floor. "This place feels wrong," Clayton whispered. Dominic ignored him, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of the Codex. As he approached what appeared to be an altar, a sudden chill ran down his spine. "Do you feel that?" Florence asked, clutching her arms as if trying to ward off an invisible cold. Before anyone could answer, a low, guttural growl echoed through the hall. The group froze, their eyes darting around the room. "What was that?" Ada breathed, her voice barely above a whisper. From the shadows emerged a figure. Humanoid in form, it still couldn't be distinguished from its dark, shape-shifting surroundings. But from behind that void came glowing eyes, as though from embers that died within a dying fire. Eitan advanced. "Get back," he ordered, brandishing his lantern. The figure did not stir. It made another growling sound, but louder, far more threatening. Slowly, the group moved backward, hearts racing. Without warning, the creature leapt. Panic ensued as people ran in all directions. Dominic seized a rusty sword from the floor and flailed wildly, but the blade cut through the creature as if it were made of smoke. "Run!" Florence screamed, yanking Ada to her feet. The group fled, their footsteps echoing through the hall. The creature did not pursue, but its growls lingered in their ears long after they had escaped the castle. Back at the village, they reconvened at Dominic's cabin. They were shaken, but unhurt. "That thing. It wasn't human," Ada said softly. "It was a warning," Florence said. "The forest doesn't want us there." Dominic furrowed his brow. "But why? What is it protecting?" "The Codex. It must be the Codex. If that thing is real, then maybe the curse is too." Eitan exhaled slowly. "I don't want to say this, but you're probably right. Whatever that was, it's not from anywhere in the physical world." The group sat silently, weighed down by their findings. They barely scratched the surface of Schattenberg's mysteries, but knew that for sure, the Book of Shadows wasn't any regular artifact, and finding it came at a heavy price. The sun, thick with clouds and struggling to cut through the thick canopy of trees surrounding Wilhelmstadt, lit up the village the following morning. Dominic stood by the well, staring down into the dark waters below. Questions swirled in his head. He had been left dazed from the night before, but he was now filled with an unrelenting urge. "I should have listened to the warnings," he muttered to himself, his voice low and indistinguishable above the soft rustle of leaves. "You mean Florence's warnings? Or the creatures?" Eitan's voice startled him. The physician approached, his expression a mixture of doubt and curiosity. "Both," Dominic replied, turning to face his old friend. "But we can't stop now. We're too close to the truth." Eitan let out a sigh. "Close to what exactly? A cursed book that may not even exist? Or our untimely deaths?" Before Dominic could answer, Florence and Ada arrived, closely followed by Clayton. The tension in their faces was evident. "Are we really going back there?" Ada asked, crossing her arms defensively. "We have to," Dominic said firmly. "If we stop now, the mystery of Schattenberg will remain unsolved, and whatever force is haunting this village will only grow stronger." Florence nodded reluctantly. "But we'll need a plan this time, and more than just rusted swords." The rest of the morning was spent collecting supplies. Florence prepared charms with herbs that she had picked in the forest. Ada honed her dagger, her cuts quick and smooth. Clayton worked on translating some old manuscript pieces that Dominic had dug up from the village archive. "This might help," Clayton said, holding up a yellowed page covered in faded ink. "It's an account of Schattenberg written by a monk in the 14th century. He mentions the Codex." "And what does it say?" Dominic asked, leaning over the table. Clayton frowned. "It's obscure, but it says the book is a gateway. The monk says that its power is not for mortals and that the foundations of the castle were built to contain it." "Contain it?" Aiton repeated. "You mean like a prison?" "Exactly," Clayton said. "And the key to finding the Codex is buried in the castle's lower levels, the catacombs." The word hung in the air like a dark cloud. Catacombs meant navigating a labyrinth of tunnels, many of which had likely collapsed over the centuries. "Then that's where we'll go," Dominic said, his voice resolute. By midday, the group had returned to Schattenberg. The ruins looked even more foreboding in the harsh light of day. The air was heavy with an unnatural stillness, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. They found an entrance to the catacombs near the castle's eastern wall, hidden beneath a tangle of ivy and fallen stones. The opening was small, barely wide enough for one person to crawl through. "I'll go first," Dominic volunteered, lighting a torch. They filed one by one into the darkness behind him. Inside, the air was damp and cold, reeking faintly of mildew and decay. The narrow tunnel soon widened out into a series of interconnected chambers, their walls carved with ancient carvings. "What do these mean?" Ada asked, her fingers tracing the symbols. "They're warnings," Clayton said tightly. "They speak of great evil sealed in these walls." As they penetrated deeper, the air became heavy. The flames of their torches danced against the walls and seemed to stir with life, creating an impression of movement. "Did you hear that?" Florence whispered, her eyes roving the chamber. The party held its breath, straining to listen. There was a faint sound in the tunnels, a footstep perhaps, or the dragging of some heavy weight. "We're not alone," Aiton said in a whisper almost too soft to be heard. The team continued, their nerves stretched to the breaking point. In one room they found a huge stone door with strange symbols. "This must be the entrance to the lower levels," Dominic said, examining the carvings. Clayton studied the symbols carefully. "It's a puzzle," he said. "We need to align the markings to open it." As he worked, the sound of footsteps grew louder. Ada and Aiton stood guard, their weapons drawn. "Hurry up, Clayton," Ada urged. "I'm trying," Clayton muttered, sweat dripping down his forehead. Finally, the door creaked open, revealing a steep staircase descending into the earth. "Let's move," Dominic said, leading the way. But as they stepped through the doorway, a mechanism triggered. The floor beneath them shifted, and the group fell into a hidden chamber below. They landed in a heap, the air knocked from their lungs. As they struggled to their feet, the room around them came into focus. It was circular, with walls covered in mirrors. Each mirror reflected not only their own images, but also shadowy figures that seemed to move independently. "What? Is this place?" Florence asked, her voice trembling. "A trap," Dominic said grimly. As they looked for an exit, the shadows in the mirrors began to take shape. They stepped out of the glass, their forms twisted and inhuman. The group fought desperately, but their weapons had little effect. The shadows moved with unnatural speed, their laughter echoing through the chamber. "Use the light!" Florence shouted, holding her torch aloft. The shadows recoiled, their forms flickering like flames in the wind. Taking her lead, the group used their torches to drive the shadows back. Eventually, the creatures retreated into the mirrors, and the chamber fell silent once more. "We need to get out of here," Aiton said, his face pale. Dominic nodded. "Agreed, but we're not leaving without the Codex." After what seemed like hours, the group finally reached the lowest level of the catacombs, a massive crypt filled with rows of stone sarcophagi. In the center of the room was a pedestal, and on top of it lay the Codex. The book was bound in black leather, its cover embossed with a symbol that seemed to writhe under their gaze. "We found it," Clayton whispered, his voice tinged with awe and fear. But as Dominic stretched out for the book, a deep, guttural voice echoed through the crypt. "You shouldn't have come." The air became thick and heavy, and a figure materialized before them. It was the same creature they had encountered in the castle, but now it was larger, its eyes burning with an intense red light. "You seek the Codex," it said, its voice resonating like thunder. "But the price is your soul." The group fought bravely, but the creature did not stop. It summoned shadows from the walls, and the crypt was plunged into chaos. In a desperate move, Dominic grabbed the Codex and held it aloft. The creature let out a deafening roar, its form beginning to dissolve. "Run!" Dominic shouted. The group ran, moving through the maze of tunnels as the creature's roars echoed behind them. They barely managed to escape the catacombs and collapsed in exhaustion as the first rays of dawn crept over the horizon. When they caught their breath, Dominic opened the Codex. Pages were filled with strange symbols and diagrams, the meaning of which was unclear. "We have it," he said, his voice both relieved and laced with terror. "At what cost?" The group passed uneasy glances. They'd survived the abominations at Schattenberg, but only the real terrors were ahead. The next morning, silence hung heavy over Wilhelmstadt after the escape from the catacombs of Schattenberg. The group was exhausted and haunted, gathered in Dominic's study. The Codex lay on the table, its presence commanding attention. The leather binding seemed to pulse faintly, as if alive, and the strange symbols on its cover writhed under their gaze. So what now? "We have the Codex, but we don't even know how to read it," Florence said, breaking the silence. Clayton, who had been examining the book closely, looked up. "It's written in an ancient dialect of Aramaic, mixed with Hebrew. I can translate parts of it, but it'll take time." "We don't have time," Eitan said sharply. "That thing in the catacombs, it's not going to stop. It knows we have the Codex." Dominic nodded grimly. "Then we need to act fast. Clayton, start translating. Florence, Ada, prepare whatever defenses you can. We'll need every advantage if we're going to face this." As Clayton worked on deciphering the Codex, strange occurrences began to plague the house. Shadows moved where there was no light. Faint whispers echoed through the halls, and the temperature dropped unnaturally. "I don't like this," Ada said one evening, clutching her dagger tightly. "It feels like the house is alive." "It's the Codex," Florence replied. "Its power is leaking out, drawing the darkness to us." Hours turned into days as Clayton pored over the ancient text. Finally, he called the group together. "I have succeeded," he declared, though his voice was tinged with unease. "The Codex contains rituals, spells, that can either bind or release great powers. It was created as a tool to seal something called the Nephilim, an ancient entity of unimaginable power." "The creature in the catacombs?" Eitan asked. "No," Clayton said, shaking his head. "That was only a guardian, a servant of the Nephilim. The real being remains sealed under Schattenberg. But the Codex is also a key. If used incorrectly, it could well unlock the Nephilim instead of binding it." The heavy stillness followed his words. "So we have to use the Codex to fortify the seal," Dominic said, "before it's too late." "But the ritual requires a sacrifice," Clayton said, his voice barely above a whisper. The group argued late into the night, their voices growing more desperate as the reality of the situation sank in. The Codex demanded a life to complete the ritual, a willing offering to empower the seal. "I'll do it," Dominic said finally, his voice steady. "No," Florence said firmly. "We need you to lead us. If anybody should do this, it's me. We are not giving anyone up. Ada rushed in, her eyes on fire. There has to be another way. However, as they argued, the house shook with a fierce force. The lights flickered and a deafening boom echoed from outside. It's here, Eitan said, his face pale. The group armed themselves and stepped out. The moon was hidden by thick clouds. The village had fallen into complete darkness. Standing in the middle of the square was the creature from the catacombs, a form even more monstrous than that time. Red eyes burned with fire, while its voice rolled like an earthquake. You challenge the will of the Nephilim, it roared. Dominic stepped forward, holding the codex. We dare to end this. The creature lunged and chaos erupted. The group fought valiantly with their torches and weapons to fend off the shadows the creature generated. Florence's charms had put up walls of protection but had been breached utterly. We can't hold it off for much longer, shouted Eitan. Then we finish the ritual, Clayton yelled back and opened the codex. As the others tried to keep it at bay, Clayton and Dominic spoke the ritual aloud. The words were heavy upon their tongues. It was as if the very air itself resisted what they did. The ground below them trembled, and Codex glowed with an ethereal light. The creature howled with fury as its form wavered in and out as the ritual came to effect. It leaped towards Dominic, but Florence hurled herself before him, her protecting charm blazed like a fiery light. End it! She shrieked as the creature's claws tore into her. Dominic and Clayton continued to chant, their voices booming over the cacophony of battle. The codex shone bright, its beam shooting out of the pages into the creature. When the light faded, the village was silent. The creature was gone, and the codex lay closed on the ground. Florence's lifeless body lay nearby, her sacrifice etched into the hearts of her companions. It's over, Dominic said, though his voice was hollow. Is it? Ada asked, her eyes fixed on the codex. The group knew they had won a battle, but the war against the darkness was far from over. The codex remained, its power both a blessing and a curse. As the dawn broke over Wilhelmstadt, Dominic vowed, "We'll protect the codex," he said firmly, "and we'll make sure the Nephilim never rises again."